own more wealth than half of the world's population. Half of the world's population. So when they talk to you about we're all in it together, it's absolute and complete claptrap. When they say, oh, the latest thing was Theresa May announced this week, let's not forget, she announced this week that she's going to have new measures to stop terrorism. New measures. Now, I seem to remember that when the Twin Towers were knocked down in 2001, stringent controls and measures were taken in society, such that permission was given to GCHQ, that's British Secret Intelligence spying operations, and the NSA, that's the American Secret Intelligence spying operations, to gather every single communication that you make all your life. That now is their property. Everything you do on the internet, every telephone call you make, every email communication you make, every text message you send, all stored and recorded by GCHQ and the NSA to protect you from terrorism. So we are told. Just like I remember, I used to live in East Germany. I lived in East Germany before the Berlin Wall was there. When the Berlin Wall was there, you had the occasional person would collect information on you in a paper file and store it in the record office. What's the matter with you today, my friend? What? How are you today? Good. So these same people now turn around and say, we must worry about terrorism because a guy from London, it sounds like he's from London, he sounds like one of the guys from Speaker's Corner actually, a guy from London slices the head off an American on television in Iraq. Now, there were 4 weeks ago, there were apparently 5,000 fighters for what was called ISIS at the time. Now they call themselves the Islamic State, and they have, at the time when they had 5,000 fighters, 500 were said to come from Britain. 500! Now, here we have the essence of the problem. The British, because of their imperial policy, across the entire planet, they jump in. Remember George Bush, we're going to go to Afghanistan. Operation, what was it called? What was the operation in huh? What was it called again in Afghanistan, the operation? Infinite Justice. Operation Infinite Justice, where we went to fight against the Taliban, and in the name of fighting Bin Laden. Don't forget, Bin Laden had been armed, trained and financed by the British and Americans, and the holes in the mountains in Tora Bora, financed and organised by the Americans and the British, where he hid away. And then we went to go and fight him. Some of you might have seen this film by Michael Moore, where the members of Bin Laden's family were picked up by the American Air Force and flown out of America the day after September the 11th by the American government. Now, under George Bush. With George Bush, you see this intimate connection with the gangsters who rule over Saudi Arabia, this theocracy that financed and supported the emergence of this Wahhabi sect that Bin Laden is a spin-off from. And then out of this Wahhabi sect, after the terrorism policies of Bin Laden failed and Bin Laden himself was assassinated, murdered by the Americans. Maybe. Well, certainly murdered by the Americans in order that they didn't want to put him on trial, did they? Right? It wouldn't have been very useful having him on trial and him explaining, you know, oh yeah, I met with them, and the CIA gave me this, and MI5 gave me this. It wouldn't look good. So it was probably better, you know, to stick him in a room, hands up, bang, blow his head off. Right? Sorry? What? In Guantanamo Bay. Now,
cut his head off.
Now, having fought in Afghanistan and then fought in Iraq. In Iraq, let's not forget, we were told the danger of Saddam Hussein was that he would harbour terrorism. You wanted to say something? Did you want to say something? You're waving. Is that he would harbour terrorism, and that the weapons of mass destruction would fall into terrorist hands. He would sponsor it. And then what happened was, when we overthrew Saddam Hussein, gangsters were put in power by the British and the Americans. These gangsters have escalated the sectarian conflict, and now, of course, a spin-off from Al Qaeda, expelled by Al Qaeda, has now become a threat to power in the entire country, and they are gaining control. Let's not forget about this. They have now having had only a few weeks ago 5,000 fighters. They now have 10,000 fighters, and these 10,000 fighters are fighting a regular army that was trained for 11 years by the British and Americans, of 600,000 soldiers, and yet the 600,000 are losing. When they lose this war, they are handing the weapons that they have captured, that the Americans gave them. The weapons are going into the hands of these ISIS fighters. So actually, to be honest with you, for the first time, I am actually scared. I'm actually scared. Because they are armed and financed by, well, they've gained control of the weapons from America, just like the Vietnamese did during the Vietnamese Civil War. But of course, these weapons are much more dangerous. Plus the fact that the Americans didn't support the revolutionaries in Vietnam, they supported the reactionaries. But in the case of Iraq and Syria, because this caliphate now covers an entire region, it's not just one country. In the case of Iraq and Syria, they will have chemical weapons, they will have all the weapons the Americans have given them, and more importantly, they've got billions of dollars given them by wealthy Saudi Arabians and Kuwaitis, who are still financing them now. Billions of dollars. And these people, when Theresa May says we've got to watch out for these people, the truth of the matter is, they're all around us. They're all around us because the British and Americans have carried out policies that alienated significant sections of the Muslim population inside Britain. And layers of them, more intellectual ones, who go out and recruit. I've seen that in Speaker's Corner. They go out and recruit people, and when they recruit people, they pick up quite a few people who've come out of prison or engaged in a drug deal or come from gangs. And these layers of the people are prepared to go and fight. They're prepared to go and fight because they feel their Muslim brothers and sisters are being murdered by American and British bombs, and no one gives a shit. And how can they not think that they're right? Because when you look at Gaza, and you see 1,000 Palestinians killed, 30 Israelis killed, and you still have the government of Britain swearing blind that everything Israel does is good and everything that the Palestinians do is bad.
Hamas kill their own people.
Sorry?
Hamas kills their own people.
My friend.
They've just executed 18 people in their own square.
My friend, lots of people kill their own people. It's a terrible thing. Auschwitz, for example, was sold to the Germans by a Jew. Now lots of people kill people.
The British government did not say that everything that Israel was good. They did not say that.
My friend,
You obviously haven't been listening.
I have listened. I have listened.
You may argue they didn't do enough, but you cannot argue they didn't say
What on
nothing.
earth have they done against them? What on earth have the British government... My friend, the gentleman here is saying, he's swearing out, it's so important that Hamas have killed some people. Have Hamas killed people?
They thought they were collaborating.
The gentleman is saying they have. That's one story. No. How many people have Israel killed?
They just shot them.
How many people have Israel killed?
Well, they don't intentionally kill them, do they?
What do you mean? Intentionally? Into a prison camp? That's intentional. How many rockets intentional? I know what a prison camp is.
Where did they have info from?
Auschwitz was a prison camp where millions of Jews were detained.
Auschwitz was an extermination camp.
Yes, it was an extermination camp. But at first, it was a prison camp. They began extermination, not when they first built it, but later.
Are Palestinians gassed like they did in
Palestinians are herded and contained within a concentration camp,
they plant bombs on buses in
Israel systematically bombs and attacks.
It's essential for security.
My friend, so they say about everything.
Well, in the 90s, there was a bomb going off on Israeli buses every week.
My friend.
That's what BBC tells you.
Every week.
My friend. The fact of the matter is, Israel, as a state, was established by terrorism. By terrorism. There was a terrorist war organised after the Second World War.
Headquarters of the British. It was a military headquarters by the British. They told them that they were going to plant a bomb there, and they gave them warning to leave.
Not send rockets into Israel, inviting retribution.
Sorry?
Why would you do that? It's ridiculous.
Now, I am not going to engage. I am not going to engage in a stupid discussion.
Tunnels underneath the border to go and hit the...
My friend, when I lived in East Germany,
hundreds of children, hundreds of Palestinian children killed in the tunnels.
Come round here, my friend.
I'm going on a nice walk in a minute. So
Now, the gentleman here wants to tell you about tunnels. I lived in East Germany. When East Germans wanted to escape from being in prison, they built tunnels. Everyone cheered.
So why are there rockets
in
the
fact,
tunnels?
the CIA
so why
built
are
the
there
tunnels.
rockets in the tunnels if it's just
My friend,
to escape?
The East Germans also alleged that the people digging tunnels were in collaboration with the CIA, and some of them were. Some of them were.
Why are there rockets in the tunnels? Why are there
In the
rockets
case of Israel, my friend, all I would say to you would be this. I don't wish to engage in a minuite discussion about each. Well, that will be enough for that.
You avoid the detail. You avoid the detail.
The truth of the matter is, the gentleman here has no sense of proportion. No sense of proportion. So, when Israel,
Yes, absolutely.
right, because the gentleman says,
That's fine.
what the gentleman here wants us to do.
He has been brainwashed by BBC, those support guys. Brainwashed by BBC.
What the gentleman here wants us to do. My friend, why is the security
Kids is terrible. Absolutely right. Killing children is awful.
We'll use it as a defence. We'll say, oh, we're defending ourselves by killing
But Hamas glorify it when people are dying.
if one does not, the gentleman here's tactic is the following. The gentleman here's tactic is the following. One sec. The gentleman here's tactic in arguing is the following. If you oppose Israel, you are with Hamas. That's his argument. That's his argument. That's his argument. Therefore, it's the same. And now, where does this mentality come from? It's the same mentality that says, if you criticize Israel, you're in favor of the Holocaust.
Do you think Hamas wants peace with Israel?
My friend, I am not a supporter of Hamas.
You seem to be.
You know, don't listen. If I oppose Israel, I'm a supporter of Hamas. Do you know anything about my mindset?
I just heard what you said.
I said Israel has got the Palestinian people in Gaza in an effective concentration camp.
Just you mean like the Egyptians?
Second, I'm not talking about the Egyptians. I'm talking about Israel.
I'm telling you that the Egyptians.
Excuse me.
It's ridiculous. I don't excuse
Israel
you when you
has
just talk in
got-
broad terms and you avoid the detail because the detail is inconvenient.
Because
Do you have
not
any
because the
criticism-
detail isn't
Do you
convenient.
have any criticism of Hamas? Any criticism?
I do not support Hamas.
I want to know if you have any
That's it.
criticism of the war.
Why do I have to criticize
Because
them?
you've
I don't
numbered-
support them.
You've numbered many things
I
about
do not.
Israel that you don't like.
I'm just saying.
Are there any things you don't
What things have I said about Israel I don't like apart
You
from
say
killing
it's a
people?
concentration
Apart
camp,
from imprisoning people and killing people.
civilians.
What else have I said?
I want to hear any criticism.
Sorry, what did I say against Israel apart from their killing people in Gaza in massively disproportionate numbers, and that they're imprisoning the Palestinian people. What else did I say? Anybody hear anything?
There would be 150,000 dead.
Any criticism over Israel, there was no
What?
Yeah, like why disproportionate number? Like if Hamas fires a bomb, like Israel bunkers and start to protect people, and Hamas fires bombs from schools, from hospitals. So naturally, when Israel fires back,
Let's imagine following scenario.
No, let's imagine that. I'm a Hamas and I'm in hospital and I just start firing rockets from a hospital. And you are in Israel. Are you just okay? They're sending rockets from hospital, but
My friend,
I'm not going to fire back because there is
my friend, you have no idea about the balance of forces.
Maybe I do.
The balance of forces.
No,
It's like what's going on in Ukraine. Same thing. In Ukraine, a city, Donetsk, encircled by the Ukrainian army, backed by the Americans, the British, and the Germans. They have no food, no electricity, no clean water, and when the Russians send in supplies of water and food and generators, it's the Russians who are condemned. Now, thousands of people have been killed in eastern Ukraine by the Ukrainian army attacking the people there. And yet, the British newspapers and the British press talk about Russia all the time. Like Russia is somehow attacking innocent people. The fact of the matter is, the refugees who have left eastern Ukraine, where have they gone? Have they gone to western Ukraine? No, they've gone to Russia, which means they see Russia as their protector, rightly or wrongly. Now, in the case of Israel, Israel has systematically stolen the land of the Palestinian people. It began with a terrorist war to seize control and seize an area that they would call Israel. It extended year after year to seize all the territories controlled by Palestinian people, such that only tiny enclaves remain. The Palestinian people and the cause of the Palestinian people is one of the major reasons why Islamic fundamentalism in the form of terrorist structures developed in the first place. And it's the nexus of Israeli ruling class, Saudi Arabian ruling class, American ruling class that are responsible, and the British ruling class that are responsible for most of the crises in the Middle East. They divided up the Middle East, they carved it up, handed it over to sheikhs, crooks and gangsters in one country after another, which they continued to back up until the masses gave their lives on the streets to overthrow these governments in Egypt, in Tunisia and elsewhere. And then they turn around and claim that the British and the Americans and the Israelis are somehow protecting us. The British, the Americans, the Israelis and the Saudis, by the way, they are, or better said, first of all, let's deal with the main responsibility. The British and the Americans are the number one imperialist countries in the history of the world. Number one countries. They are the ones who carried out most of the massacres around the world. Not Palestinian fundamentalists or Hamas supporters or Islamic fundamentalists or terrorists here or there. All the terrorist deaths in the last 150 years do not add up to the number of people murdered by the British and Americans in Iraq in the last 10 years. No. All the deaths in the entire world from terrorism. Sorry, unless you talk about state terrorism. State terrorism is a policy supported by America, by Britain, and by Israel as a mechanism of maintaining their wealth and power of the elite of Britain, America, and Israel. So when they tell you about, there are bombs going off that attack, they want to engage in this type of discussion. This pathetic, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to engage in discussion. They fired this bomb, we fired that bomb. That's not the discussion we're having. We're talking about what is right. What is right, what is just, what is the motivation of the people. The motivation of the Israelis is to protect themselves and their chosen people. Who are their chosen people? Anyone who's a Jew and comes to Israel and is welcomed there with open arms. They have a growth in population of 7% a year. From what? From what? From imported people who are then told, that's your land, take it. Right? And then the Israeli army backs them up and shoots anybody who tries to take it off them. That is supposed to be justice? That's exactly the same policy as Adolf Hitler carried out in Eastern Europe. This is our land, we'll take it. That's what they said, the Nazis in the Second World War. And so, the fact of the matter is that the Zionists in Israel basically have a policy that has many similarities with Adolf Hitler's policies in relation to Eastern Europe, in relation to concentration camps. That's what it is. Gaza is a concentration camp. So when these people come and tell you about, you must be supporting Hamas if you oppose Israel, it's just such a lot of shit. It's beneath contempt. Beneath contempt. The Palestinian people can decide on themselves what forces they support. But the truth of the matter is, they will never be able to determine their own fate as long as, unfortunately, as long as the Israeli masses support the Israeli leadership.
There's no easy solution.
1945. In 1945.
Can we move over a little bit because there's a second meeting happening?
In 1945. So Zionists in 1945.
The fact of the matter is, many countries, many peoples have got legitimate national claims to a homeland. The Jews had a legitimate moral claim to be able to live somewhere after 1945. The truth of the matter is that it was selected that Palestine would be the place they would go to because of historical reasons, and then that was used as an excuse by reactionary Zionists to engage in a policy of conquest. So it's one thing to say, do Jewish people have a right to live in Israel? Yes. Do the Israelis have a right to live where they live? Yes. In my opinion, yes. But they should live alongside their brothers and sisters as brothers and sisters, not as oppressors of the other people. And the fact, and what leads to this, I do understand that.
And let me just make my point, because you're persuasive and what you say is correct about doing the right thing. What I'm saying is that there is a tendency to rewrite history in the reverse direction and to say that Jews were fundamentally colonizers, terrorists, and expansionists. Now, the Zionist movement of the 19th century, of course it had elements of territorialism and colonialism, but by and large was not a movement, in my opinion, inspired and driven by a powerful group of people. It was by
I met people.
And I'm saying that historical fact has been completely missed out. And now I'm not talking about modern day Israel. You correctly placed modern day Israel alongside other states. It has a military, it has an army. It's a state. We don't need to talk about it as any other term. But there are people living in the world today who psychologically, Jews I'm talking about, the world that I come from, who deep down feel very frightened. What is the world going to do to Jews? How are you going to talk them out of a state? Now, I'm not, by the way, none of this is
I'm not arguing for that.
None of this is
I'm not arguing for that.
Well, you mentioned that the state was
I met many people.
Just to finish my point, you mentioned that the state was founded in terrorism, was rooted in terrorism. Of course, they were, by any modern definition, terrorists. But what did you mean by that when you said that?
I met people. I'll go back to a slightly different question first. I met people both at Speaker's Corner and in my activities as a Marxist over many years, who are older Jewish Marxists, and some of them had gone to Israel in 1945 and thereafter in the hope that they would build a new society on socialist principles in collaboration with the Arab and Palestinian people. In reality, forces developed in Israel that were the extreme right-wing reactionary forces developed in Israel and gained dominance over the country. Now that conflict is a real historical conflict that gave birth to this dilemma that we have now, this crisis we have now. But the fundamental question is not about did people want to do something good. Yes, many people did, but they ended up In fact, some people have predicted this. Leon Trotsky in the 1930s said, if they create such a state, it will be a prison for the Jews as well. And that's what it's become. So, and they even say our security. What do they mean? They mean we feel insecure. We feel we must protect our... Of course, the truth of the matter is, only a couple of years ago, in the middle of the Arab Spring, there was a large movement in Israel of protest against the government. It's true that many of the people protesting and organising the protests were Marxists and left-wingers, but they were afraid of raising the slogan of unity with the Palestinians and the Arabs, because they knew that the reactionaries would use their position of authority and power to turn the movement against them and then undermine the whole of the movement. So it's become, it remains a battle inside Israel amongst the Jews and the Palestinian people. One, to find a pathway of unity, which is the unity of the working people. The working people, they can find a collaboration between them. This was the left-wing socialists, Jewish socialists in the 1930s and 40s. They tried to do this. They tried to make alliances with the Arabs, and they succeeded in some cases. On the other side, there were people, these Golda Meir and so people like that. They were fighting with weapons, with terrorist weapons.
Of course, and then what you're saying is right. I just want to caution you, because what you're presenting is a highly nuanced, I mean, I'm even going to use the R word, reasonable opinion, right? But it's not held by a large group of people, and in my experience. And I'm someone who, I'm not just sympathetic, I'm in agreement to most of what you say. Give or take a few points. But a large percentage of people, I'm not saying a majority, I don't know what percentage of, but a significant percentage of people who are opposed to to Israel I can't look at my contemporary sort of Jewish Zionist friends and tell them, don't worry about it.
Yeah, my problem lies in this.
You can't. No,
my problem lies in this.
By the way, all I'm saying is, none of this is in the same way you say you're not with Hamas. I'm not with the guys shooting rockets into Gaza. Right? So don't put me in their camp.
I wouldn't dream of doing it.
I'm not saying you would, but people do this. They say, well, therefore you're defending Mr. Netanyahu. I'm telling you, there's a genuine fear that they're coming to kill us all, quote unquote, coming to kill us all again.
I understand that.
And how do you talk people out of it?
Well, the truth of the matter is, we can look all around the world now, and in one country after another, and one hotspot after another, we are seeing the insanity of nationalism taking a dominant role within society, and or the insanity, which I believe is pretty much the same thing, the insanity of religious fundamentalism acquiring a hue that has a political connotation that leads to someone from London chopping off an American's head on television or on video, posting it on YouTube. Now, in Iraq and Syria. Now the British government...
And that person, to be clear, that person's not attracted to talk about working class solidarity. He's not a... I'm saying he hasn't been. No, he may be, right, but he hasn't been. That's my point.
In my opinion, this is a global struggle. We live in an era where even though all these issues are surrounding us and appear to be the issues people want to discuss, the guy really wanted to have an argument like the Israeli supporter over there has, long live Israel and let's have a row. Israel did this, Hamas did this, Israel did this, Hamas did this, and they fired that bomb and I fired that bomb. Of course, the question is, underneath the surface of this appearance of barbarity, which of course the majority of Israeli people do not really support, and the majority of Palestinian and Arab people also do not support. They do not want a war and a conflict and barbarity. They want education, healthcare, welfare, work, peace and freedom. That's what people everywhere want. Now, how do you get out of a scenario of barbarity where people are chopping each other up in the name of nationalism or in the name of religion to a position where people recognize their common interest? And the truth of the matter is, we have 100 years, that's the point, about the First World War, we have 100 years of experience of this. Despite what they're telling us, I was in a pub around the corner here the night before the anniversary, and they were singing songs. I went with some Germans to the pub and they were singing English, wartime songs and things like this. And I was about to get up and do Wilfred Owen's Dulciet Decorum Est. And, but it's kind of a middle-class pub, or middle-class, upper-class pub. And so someone got up and sang a song glorifying the war, the First World War. And of course, I remember a meeting years ago. A speaker stood up and he said, scratch the head of an Englishman and what comes out of their memory is war, imperial control, the empire, going back hundreds of years. That's what they celebrate in England. You go around London, we have killers and statues of killers all around London. Killers, you go to Trafalgar Square. On Trafalgar Square, we have Havelock. Havelock, they say, this monument was built by Indians and the British to commemorate Havelock for his activity in 1857 in India. What did he do in 1857? Murdered thousands of Indians, right? And that's celebrated on Trafalgar Square. You go all around London, it's the same story. So, in Britain we have a long history of imperialist indoctrination within the general population. That's why they tell you about kings and queens, and they have, you know, Games of Thrones on televisions and stories about kings and queens as great historical dramas and so on. Because the British historical memory